Sienna's hands trembled as she pressed them against her swollen belly, trying to calm the angry kicks from inside. 8 months pregnant, sitting on cold concrete outside Romano's, one of the city's most expensive restaurants, watching well-dressed people walk past her like she was invisible. The smell of garlic butter and grilled steak wafted through the door every time it opened, making her stomach clench with hunger she'd felt for 3 straight days. Her clothes were torn at the hem, stained with dirt from sleeping in doorways. Her natural hair, once carefully styled, now hung in matted sections around her face. She'd lost the scrunchie that held it back 2 nights ago. Her feet were swollen, pushing against the worn sneakers that were her only shoes. But the worst part, the part that made her want to scream into the night sky, wasn't the hunger or the cold or the exhaustion. It was the memory of who she used to be just 3 months ago. 3 months ago, she had been Sienna Brooks, owner of Elegance Interiors, one of the fastest-growing interior design firms in the city. She'd had a waiting list of clients, a beautiful townhouse in the historic district, and a husband who kissed her forehead every morning before work. She'd been planning the nursery, picking out tiny clothes, dreaming about holding her baby for the first time. Now she was nobody. A homeless pregnant woman that strangers stepped around on their way to their comfortable lives. A couple exited the restaurant, and Sienna forced herself to stand, her back screaming in protest. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice hoarse from crying herself to sleep the night before. "Could you spare any change? Or maybe your leftovers? I haven't eaten in days." The woman clutched her purse tighter and the man pulled her past quickly, not even looking at Sienna. She wanted to yell after them that she wasn't dangerous, that she was educated, that she'd once designed homes worth millions. But what would be the point? To them, she was just another homeless person, another problem they didn't want to acknowledge. She sank back down, her daughter kicking harder now, probably feeling her mother's distress. "I'm sorry, baby," Sienna whispered, rubbing her belly. "I'm so sorry this is where we are. But I promise you I'm going to figure this out. Somehow." The restaurant door opened again, and a tall man in an expensive suit stepped out, checking his phone. Everything about him screamed wealth and power, from his custom-tailored clothes to the way he carried himself. Sienna almost didn't approach him. Men like that didn't see people like her. But her baby kicked again hard and desperation made her brave. "Sir?" She struggled to her feet again, every movement an effort. "I'm sorry to bother you, but do you have any food you didn't finish? Anything at all? I'm pregnant and I haven't eaten in 3 days." The man looked up from his phone and Sienna expected the usual reaction. Averted eyes, quick dismissal, maybe even disgust. But instead, his expression shifted to something she couldn't quite read. He studied her face, taking in her gaunt cheeks, her desperate eyes, the way she protectively held her belly. 3 days, he repeated. His voice was deep, controlled, but there was an edge to it that suggested anger, though not at her. "Sit down before you fall down." Sienna's legs gave out and she sank onto the bench beside the restaurant entrance. The man disappeared back inside and she assumed that was it. He'd felt uncomfortable and fled. She wouldn't see him again. But 5 minutes later, he emerged carrying 2 large bags that smelled like heaven. "I ordered you several meals," he said, sitting down beside her and setting the bags between them. "There's chicken, pasta, soup, bread, and fruit. You need to eat slowly, okay? Your stomach isn't used to food right now." Sienna stared at the bags, then at him, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." "When's your baby due?" he asked, still watching her with that intense, assessing gaze. 4 weeks, Sienna said, pulling out a container of chicken soup with shaking hands. The first sip was so good she almost sobbed. "4 weeks and I have nowhere to go, no money, nothing." "What's your name?" "Sienna." "Sienna Brooks." Something flickered across his face. "The interior designer? You did the Morrison Hotel renovation last year?" Sienna's hand froze halfway to her mouth. She looked at him, really looked at him, and recognition finally clicked. Gerald Thompson. Tech billionaire, real estate mogul, one of the richest men in the country. And he knew her work. "That was me," she said quietly. "Before my life fell apart." Gerald was quiet for a long moment, watching her eat. "I want to hear your story," he said finally. "All of it. But first, finish eating. Then we're going to talk about what comes next." Sienna wanted to ask what he meant, but her body was screaming for food and she couldn't stop eating. She went through the soup, then moved to the pasta, forcing herself to eat slowly even though everything in her wanted to devour it all at once. Gerald sat beside her, silent, hacking his phone occasionally but mostly just sitting there like a guard, like his presence alone could protect her from the world that had chewed her up and spit her out. When she finally couldn't eat another bite, she carefully packed the remaining food back into the bags. "I'll save this for later," she said. "I don't know when I'll eat again." "Tell me what happened," Gerald said. "How does a talented designer with a thriving business end up on the street 8 months pregnant?" And there, on a bench outside a restaurant she used to eat at with clients, Sienna told a billionaire stranger the story of how her husband had destroyed her life. 3 months earlier, Sienna had been standing in the kitchen of her beautiful townhouse, preparing dinner and humming along to jazz music playing from the speaker. At 6 months pregnant, she finally had her energy back after a rough first trimester. The nursery was painted a soft sage green, furniture ordered, tiny clothes washed and folded. Her business had just landed 3 major commercial projects that would keep her team busy for the next year. Life was perfect. Trevor, her husband of 5 years, was due home any minute. He'd been working late a lot recently, which she understood. He was a financial consultant at a prestigious firm downtown, and year-end was always busy. She'd made his favorite meal, roasted chicken with potatoes and green beans, wanting to celebrate the good news she'd gotten that day. Her biggest client yet had signed a contract for a chain of boutique hotels. She tried calling Trevor twice to tell him the news, but both calls went to voicemail. Not unusual when he was with clients. She set the table, lit candles, and checked her phone. Still nothing. Maybe he'd forgotten to charge it again. His laptop was sitting on the coffee table where he'd left it that morning in his rush to get to an early meeting. Sienna rarely touched his work computer, but they shared a calendar app and she wanted to update it with her new project timeline. She opened the laptop, expecting to see his work dashboard. Instead, she saw messages. Lots of them. Open on the screen because he'd never logged out. "Can't wait to see you tonight, baby. The sneaking around is getting old. When are you going to tell her?" Sienna's hands went numb. She scrolled up, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Message after message going back months. Candace, his secretary at the firm. The woman Sienna had met at the company holiday party, who had smiled sweetly and complimented Sienna's dress while apparently sleeping with her husband. "I know, baby, but the timing has to be right. Once the baby is born, we'll make our move. I've been setting things up just like we discussed." The baby. Their baby. He'd been planning to leave her since before they even knew she was pregnant. Sienna kept reading, her vision blurring with tears. There were photos. Candace in lingerie. Candace at restaurants Sienna recognized, places Trevor said he was having business dinners. Candace in what looked like a hotel room, the kind of luxury suite Trevor sometimes booked when he claimed to be traveling for work. Then she found the financial messages and her blood turned to ice. "I moved another $20,000 from her business account today. The routing numbers you set up are working perfectly." She never checks the secondary accounts, too busy with her projects. By the time she notices, we'll have enough to disappear. Sienna ran to her office, her hands shaking so badly she could barely type her password. She logged into her business banking, something she usually only did weekly since her accountant handled the day-to-day transactions. $50,000 missing from her operating account. $75,000 from her client deposit account. $30,000 from the savings she'd built up over years of hard work. Over $150,000 gone, transferred out in small amounts over the past 6 months. And she'd been so busy with projects, so distracted by pregnancy and preparing for the baby, that she hadn't noticed. She heard Trevor's car in the driveway. The front door opening. His cheerful, "Honey, I'm home." Sienna stood in her office doorway, his laptop in her hands, the evidence of his betrayal glowing on the screen. Trevor stopped when he saw her face. "What's wrong?" he asked, but his eyes went to the laptop and she saw recognition flash across his features. Not guilt. Not shame. Just cold calculation. "How could you?" she whispered. "I'm pregnant with your child." Trevor's expression shifted into something she'd never seen before, something cruel and ugly. "That baby isn't the future I want," he said flatly. "Candace and I have been planning this for months. We're starting fresh together. And thanks to your very successful business, we'll have quite the nest egg." Sienna felt like she was falling, like the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. "You stole from my business. That's a crime, Trevor. That's embezzlement." He smiled and it was the coldest thing she'd ever seen. "Prove it. You'll find that all the transfers were authorized with your business credentials. My friend Jake, the lawyer? He helped set it up. Everything looks completely legal. You authorized those transfers as far as anyone can prove. I never authorized anything. Can you prove that? Or will it just look like a desperate woman trying to blame her husband because her business failed?" Trevor stepped closer, his voice low and threatening. Here's how this is going to go, Sienna. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow. My lawyer will claim you're mentally unstable, that pregnancy hormones have made you paranoid and irrational. We'll freeze all accounts while the divorce is processed, for your own protection of course. By the time the court's sorted out, Candace and I will be long gone with enough money to start over somewhere nice. You won't get away with this, Sienna said, but her voice shook. She could already see how it would play out. She had no proof. Her word against his and a lawyer who'd help him. I already have, Trevor said, pulling out his phone. Candace? Yeah, she found out. Time to move to plan B. He looked at Sienna with pure contempt. You should have been smarter. You should have paid attention instead of being so focused on playing house and building your little design company. This is your fault for being blind. He walked upstairs and Sienna heard him moving around in their bedroom, packing. She stood frozen, one hand on her belly, feeling her daughter kick, completely unsure what to do. Call the police? And tell them what? That her husband stole money in a way that looked legal? Call a lawyer? With what money if he was freezing the accounts? By the time she forced herself to move, Trevor was gone. He'd taken his clothes, his laptop, his things. He'd left her standing in their beautiful home, pregnant and betrayed, with no idea that this was just the beginning of how far she would fall. The next morning, Sienna woke up hoping it was a nightmare. But Trevor's side of the bed was empty, his closet cleared out, and when she checked her phone, there was an email from a law firm she'd never heard of. Notice of divorce proceedings and temporary restraining order. Her hands shook as she read. Trevor was claiming she'd become violent and unstable due to pregnancy complications. The restraining order prevented her from contacting him. All joint accounts were frozen pending a psychological evaluation to determine if she was fit to manage finances. There were sworn statements from people she'd thought were friends, claiming they'd witnessed her erratic behavior. All lies. Every single word was a lie. Sienna called her business account manager, desperate to at least protect what was left of her company's money. The call went nowhere. With the accounts frozen by court order, she couldn't access anything. Not for payroll. Not for supplies. Not for the project deposits she owed contractors. Nothing. She called her lawyer, the one who'd handled her business formation. His secretary said he couldn't take her call, conflict of interest. When Sienna pressed for details, the woman reluctantly admitted that Trevor had hired him first. She called another lawyer, then another. Word had spread fast in legal circles. Trevor's lawyer, Jake Morrison, was well-connected and ruthless. Nobody wanted to take a case against him, especially one that looked like a messy divorce where the wife might be mentally unstable. Each rejection felt like another door slamming in her face. Her business started collapsing within days. Without access to funds, she couldn't pay her team. Her employees quit, needing reliable paychecks. Contractors pulled out of projects, unable to wait for payment. Clients started calling, worried about their deposits. When Sienna couldn't give them answers, they threatened lawsuits. She called her best friend Nicole, desperate for someone to believe her. Nicole was sympathetic but distant, admitting that Trevor had reached out to their friend group, expressing concern about Sienna's mental state. He'd shown them carefully edited text messages that made Sienna look paranoid and accusatory. He'd painted himself as a worried husband trying to protect his unwell wife. I want to believe you, Nicole said carefully. But Sienna, some of the things he showed us, they seemed pretty concerning. Maybe you should get some help? Pregnancy can do things to your mind. My mind is fine. Sienna screamed into the phone. He's lying. He stole from me, he's having an affair, and now he's trying to make everyone think I'm crazy so he can get away with it. There was a long silence. That sounds really paranoid, Nicole said softly. Maybe that's what Trevor meant. After that call, Sienna stopped reaching out to friends. What was the point? Trevor had gotten there first, planted his version of events, made her look unstable. The more she protested, the crazier she seemed. The legal proceedings dragged on. Trevor's lawyer was brilliant at delays and complications. Each hearing got postponed. The psychological evaluation took weeks to schedule. Meanwhile, bills piled up. The mortgage went unpaid. Her business officially dissolved when she couldn't meet contractual obligations and clients sued. She learned Candace was also pregnant, 3 months behind Sienna. Trevor had apparently been busy. He'd rented them a luxury apartment across town, paid for with the money he'd stolen from Sienna's accounts. They were living the life they'd planned while Sienna watched everything she'd built crumble. 2 months after Trevor left, Sienna was evicted from her townhouse. The bank foreclosed when she missed 3 mortgage payments. She'd been so sure the courts would sort it out before it got this bad, so certain that justice would prevail. She was wrong. She packed what she could carry in 2 suitcases and went to a women's shelter. The shelter could only house her for 2 weeks. Then she'd have to figure something else out. She was 7 months pregnant now, her belly huge, her body exhausted. Finding work was impossible. Who wanted to hire a pregnant woman with no references and a reputation for being unstable? She spent those 2 weeks at the shelter applying for every job she could find. Retail, food service, cleaning, anything. Nobody called back. She applied for public assistance, but the processing time was 6 to 8 weeks. Her temporary housing voucher was denied because of some technical issue with her application. Everything that could go wrong did. When her 2 weeks at the shelter ended, Sienna found herself on the street with nowhere to go. She tried sleeping in her car until she realized Trevor had reported it stolen, a car he'd bought in his name that she'd always driven. The police impounded it before she could get her things out. Everything. She'd lost everything. Her business, her home, her car, her friends, her money, her reputation. All because she trusted the wrong man and he'd been smart enough to destroy her in ways that looked legal. Sienna spent her first night on the street in a doorway of a closed shop, curled around her pregnant belly, crying until she had no tears left. This couldn't be her life. This couldn't be real. But the cold concrete beneath her and the hunger in her stomach were very, very real. The next 3 weeks were a blur of survival. Sienna learned the rhythms of street life quickly because she had no choice. She learned which alleys were safest to sleep in, which soup kitchens had the shortest lines, which police officers would move you along versus the ones who might actually help. She learned that being pregnant made some people more generous and others actively hostile, like her condition was somehow her fault, like she'd chosen to be homeless while carrying a baby. She learned that shelters for pregnant women had waiting lists months long. She learned that the safety net everyone talked about had holes big enough to fall through, and she was falling. Her body was struggling. At 8 months pregnant, she should have been at regular doctor appointments, preparing for delivery, resting. Instead, she walked miles every day searching for resources, slept on cardboard in doorways, ate whatever she could find or beg for. Her feet were swollen so badly her shoes barely fit. Her back was in constant pain. The baby kicked constantly, probably as distressed as Sienna felt. She tried to stay clean, using public restrooms to wash up as best she could, but it was impossible to maintain any kind of hygiene living on the street. Her hair became matted. Her clothes, the same outfit day after day, grew grimy and torn. She stopped looking at her reflection in windows because she couldn't stand to see what she'd become. The worst part was the invisibility. People looked through her like she was glass. She'd become everything society trained people to ignore and avoid. Sometimes she wanted to grab someone by the shoulders and scream, "I was somebody. I designed beautiful spaces. I had a life. This could happen to you." But she never did because she knew they wouldn't believe her. She spent her days trying to access resources that barely existed. The social services office gave her forms, but she needed an address to receive mail. The housing assistance program had a 2-year waiting list. The food bank required an ID she'd lost when her belongings were stolen from the doorway where she slept. Every system designed to help required things she didn't have. One morning, she woke up in an alley behind a grocery store, cramping and bleeding slightly. Terror seized her. She was too early, the baby couldn't come yet, not while she was living on the street with no access to medical care. She managed to get to a hospital emergency room where a tired nurse examined her and said the baby was fine, it was just stress, but she needed to rest. Where? Sienna asked bitterly. Where exactly should I rest? The nurse had no answer. They couldn't admit her without cause. They gave her a pamphlet about shelters she'd already tried and sent her back out into the cold. She started spending her evenings outside restaurants in nice neighborhoods, the places she used to eat at with clients. It was humiliating, but rich people had leftover food and sometimes they'd share it. Sometimes they'd even give her a few dollars. It was never enough, but it kept her alive. That's how she ended up outside Romano's, 3 days without food because even the soup kitchens had been overwhelmed, watching wealthy people come and go, desperate enough to beg. 3 months ago she could have bought that entire restaurant. Now she was hoping someone would give her their scraps. Her baby kicked hard and Sienna rubbed her belly, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. Promises that they'd be okay, that this wouldn't last forever, that somehow she'd figure out a way to survive. When Gerald Thompson walked out of that restaurant, Sienna forced herself to ask one more time, to face one more rejection. She expected nothing. She'd learned to expect nothing because expecting something just made the disappointment worse. But Gerald didn't reject her. He listened, he helped, and when she finished telling him her story on that bench, her voice hoarse from talking, He made her an offer that sounded too good to be true. "I have corporate apartments for executives visiting from out of town," he said. "One is empty right now. You can stay there temporarily just until you get on your feet. No strings attached." Sienna stared at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because 15 years ago I was sleeping in my car working 3 jobs trying to get my first business off the ground," Gerald said. "Someone gave me a chance when I needed it most. I've never forgotten that feeling. And because I've read enough about you to know you're talented and smart. This situation you're in? It's temporary if you want it to be." "I want it to be," Sienna whispered. "Then here's my offer," Gerald said. "Clean apartment, safe place to stay. But I'm not running a charity, I'm running a business. You've got 1 week to develop a business proposal for me. Something innovative, something that uses your skills. If it's good enough, I'll provide seed funding to get you started. If it's not, you still get 2 weeks in the apartment to figure out your next move. Deal?" Sienna felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Dangerous, terrifying hope. "Deal." Gerald pulled out his phone and made a call. 20 minutes later, a car pulled up. He handed Sienna a key card. "Address is programmed in the driver's GPS. There's food in the kitchen, bathroom stocked with essentials. Get cleaned up, get some rest. I'll check in with you in 3 days." As the car pulled away from the curb, Sienna looked back to see Gerald still standing there, watching to make sure she got away safely. A billionaire who'd taken time out of his evening to help a homeless pregnant woman he didn't know. She didn't understand it, but she wasn't going to waste it. The corporate apartment was on the 15th floor of a sleek modern building downtown. Sienna stood in the doorway after the driver left, afraid to step inside. The space was beautiful, all clean lines and neutral colors, huge windows overlooking the city. There was a full kitchen, a living room with soft furniture, a bedroom with a real bed. She hadn't slept in a bed in 3 weeks. She put down the bags of food Gerald had given her and walked through the space slowly, touching things like she couldn't believe they were real. A bathroom with a deep tub. Fluffy towels. Soap and shampoo and toothpaste. She locked the door behind her, triple-checked it, then went to the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror for the first time in weeks. She barely recognized the woman staring back. Gaunt face, matted hair, hollow eyes. Dirt under her fingernails and in the creases of her skin. She looked sick, she looked desperate, she looked defeated. This wasn't who she was. This wasn't who she was going to stay. Sienna ran a bath, hot water filling the tub while she carefully undressed. Her clothes went straight into the trash, they were beyond saving. She lowered herself into the water and felt tears streaming down her face as warmth soaked into her aching body. Her baby seemed to relax too, the constant kicking settling into gentle movements. She washed her hair 3 times before it felt clean. She scrubbed every inch of her skin. She stayed in the tub until the water cooled, then drained it and filled it again. By the time she finally got out, she felt almost human. There were clothes in the bedroom closet, generic items in various sizes, probably kept there for guests. She found sweatpants and a soft shirt that fit her pregnant body, socks, even slippers. She made herself a sandwich from the supplies in the kitchen, forcing herself to eat slowly even though her body screamed for food. Then she found a notebook and pen in a desk drawer, sat down at the dining table and started planning. Gerald wanted a business proposal. She had 1 week. This was her shot, maybe her only shot, to claw her way back from rock bottom. What did she know? Interior design. Sustainable materials. Small business operations. Client relationships. What was the market missing? She'd always hated the markup on furniture and materials, the way middlemen inflated prices while craftsmen and designers struggled. What if she could connect them directly? She worked through the night, her mind clearer than it had been in months now that she had food and shelter. She sketched out an app concept, a platform where interior designers could connect directly with sustainable furniture makers, material suppliers, and craftsmen. Designers got better prices and direct relationships. Makers got consistent business without paying huge commissions to showrooms. Clients got more affordable, sustainable design. She researched until the sun came up, using the apartment's Wi-Fi to look up competitors, market size, potential revenue models. She made lists of features, pricing structures, partnership opportunities. She created user personas and customer journeys. She did everything she used to do when pitching to major clients, except now she was pitching for her own survival. 3 days later, when Gerald called to check in, Sienna had a 30-page proposal ready. They met in a coffee shop, and she presented her idea with the same confidence she'd once brought to client meetings, even though her hands shook slightly holding the pages. Gerald listened without interrupting, his expression neutral. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "This is good," he said finally. "Really good. The market analysis is solid, the revenue model makes sense, and the environmental angle will appeal to younger designers. But tell me why you can build this. Why should I trust you with my money when your last business collapsed?" "Because my last business didn't collapse due to bad management or bad ideas," Sienna said, meeting his eyes. "It collapsed because someone I trusted sabotaged it and I was too naive to protect myself. I've learned that lesson. I'll never make that mistake again." "And you're about to have a baby," Gerald pointed out. "That's going to take time and energy." "Which means I'm even more motivated to succeed," Sienna said. "I'm not building this just for me anymore. I'm building it for my daughter. To show her that you can lose everything and still fight your way back. To give her a better life than the one I'm living right now." Gerald nodded slowly. "Here's what I'll do. I'll provide $50,000 in seed funding. You'll build a minimum viable product, test it with a small group of designers and makers. If it works, if you can show traction, we'll talk about a second round. But you need to understand something." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "I'm not a charity. I'm investing because I think this can work and because I think you can make it work. But you're going to do the work. I'll provide capital and connections, but I'm not going to hold your hand. You build this, you run it, you make it successful. I expect regular reports and I expect results. Can you handle that?" Sienna thought about sleeping in doorways, begging for food, watching her life get destroyed. She thought about Trevor's cruel smile and Candace's smug satisfaction. She thought about the baby growing inside her who deserved better than a mother broken by betrayal. "I can handle anything," she said. Gerald smiled for the first time since she'd met him. "I believe you can. Paperwork will be ready in 2 days. Start assembling your team." After he left, Sienna sat alone with her coffee, one hand on her belly, feeling her daughter kick. "We're going to be okay," she whispered. "Mommy's going to make sure of it." Sienna gave birth to Hope Elizabeth Brooks on a cold Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after securing Gerald's investment. Labor started while she was finalizing partnership agreements with sustainable furniture makers, her contractions timing themselves between phone calls. She made it to the hospital just in time. Hope was perfect. 7 pounds, 6 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and eyes that seemed to look right into Sienna's soul. When the nurse placed her daughter in her arms, Sienna cried harder than she had during the worst moments on the street. These were different tears though, tears of relief and love and fierce determination. "I promise you," she whispered to her sleeping daughter, "you will never know the kind of struggle I went through. I'm going to build something so strong, so solid, that nobody can ever take it away from us." She spent 2 weeks recovering, working from the hospital room and then the apartment. Her laptop was her lifeline, her connection to the business she was building. Gerald had been true to his word, providing capital but stepping back to let her run things. She hired a developer to build the app, a young woman named Tasha who was brilliant with code and shared Sienna's vision for sustainable design. Finding childcare was harder. Daycare cost more than she could afford yet, and she needed to keep costs low until the business generated revenue. She ended up joining a co-op of other entrepreneur mothers, trading childcare hours and working in shifts. It was exhausting, but it worked. The app, which she named Sustainable Spaces, launched 6 weeks after Hope was born. The beta test group was small, just 20 designers and 30 makers, but the response was immediate and positive. Designers loved the direct access to quality materials at fair prices. Makers loved the consistent business without showroom commissions. Within 2 weeks, they processed over $100,000 in transactions, and Sienna's cut was 10%. She reinvested every penny into the business. Better servers, more developers, marketing to expand the user base. She worked 18-hour days when she could, grabbing sleep in short bursts between feeding Hope and coding new features. It was brutal, but she'd survived worse. Living on the street had taught her that she was capable of more than she'd ever imagined. 3 months after launch, Sustainable Spaces had 500 designers and 800 makers on the platform. Revenue was steady and growing. Sienna moved out of the corporate apartment into a small 2-bedroom place she could afford. Nothing fancy, but it was hers, earned through her own work. 6 months after launch, she had 2,000 users and had processed over 5 million in transactions. Gerald called her into his office, something he rarely did. "You've exceeded my expectations," he said, sliding a folder across his desk. "That's an offer for series of funding. $2 million, 15% equity. You can scale nationally, hire a real team, build this into something major." Sienna looked at the numbers, her heart racing. $2 million. 6 months ago, she'd been begging for food. What's the catch? No catch. You've proven you can execute. Now prove you can scale. Gerald leaned back in his chair. And Sienna? It's time to stop running scared. You've been operating under the radar, keeping a low profile. That made sense when you were vulnerable. But now you've got capital, you've got traction, and you've got legal protection. It's time to step into the light. He was right. She'd been so afraid of Trevor finding out about her success, so afraid he'd find a way to destroy this too. But she was stronger now. She had resources now. She had proof of what she could build. I'm ready, she said. With series of funding secured, Sienna went into expansion mode. She hired a full team, more developers, customer service reps, a marketing manager, and most importantly, a sharp lawyer named Patricia Chin who specialized in intellectual property and business law. Patricia's first job was to lock down every aspect of sustainable spaces so it couldn't be touched. Your ex-husband, Patricia said during their first meeting, reviewing the documents Sienna had saved from the divorce proceedings. He's a financial consultant with connections to corporate lawyers. Have you thought about what happens when he finds out you're successful again? Every day, Sienna admitted. She was sitting in her new office, a bright space in a converted warehouse, Hope sleeping in a portable crib nearby. That's why I need everything bulletproof. Patricia nodded. We'll incorporate in a way that protects your personal assets. We'll trademark everything. We'll set up legal barriers that would take an army of lawyers to break through. And we'll document everything he did to you, get it on record. Because trust me, Sienna, when a man like that realizes he didn't break you, he's going to try again. They worked for weeks building those legal walls. Sienna's name went on every patent, every trademark, every incorporation document. The company structure was designed to protect her. Patricia also helped her file a detailed report with the Financial Crimes Division about Trevor's embezzlement, including all the evidence Sienna had gathered before losing access to everything. They might not be able to prosecute without more proof, Patricia warned, but it creates a paper trail. If he tries anything now, this history will matter. Meanwhile, Sustainable Spaces exploded. The series of funding allowed them to advertise nationally, and designers across the country signed up. Sienna was featured in design magazines, interviewed on podcasts, invited to speak at conferences. She kept the backstory vague, just mentioning she'd overcome personal challenges to build the company. People didn't need to know she'd been homeless and pregnant, begging for food outside restaurants. But Trevor found out anyway. Of course he did. Sienna was making a name for herself again, and her success wasn't something that could be hidden. He called her office one day, somehow getting past her assistant. Sienna? His voice was oily with fake friendliness. I've been hearing great things about your new venture. Sounds like you've landed on your feet. Her hand tightened on the phone. What do you want, Trevor? I want to talk about our daughter, he said smoothly. I've been thinking maybe I should be part of her life. Have parental rights established, share custody. It's only fair. There it was. Not remorse, not guilt, just calculation. He knew she was making money and he wanted in. Wanted access to what she'd built. You signed away all parental rights, Sienna said coldly. During the divorce proceedings, you stated you wanted nothing to do with the child. Patricia has the paperwork. Patricia Chin? Trevor laughed. You hired the dragon lady herself. Must be doing well. Look, Sienna, we don't need to be enemies. I made some mistakes, things got messy, but we could work together now. For Hope's sake. Hope doesn't need you, Sienna said. She has everything she needs right here. Don't call this number again. She hung up and immediately called Patricia. He's coming after the company. I can feel it. Let him try, Patricia said grimly. We're ready. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, Trevor filed a lawsuit claiming Sienna had stolen the business idea from him, that Sustainable Spaces had been conceived during their marriage and therefore he was entitled to half. It was desperate and flimsy, but it was also expensive to fight and threatened to tie up the company in litigation. But Patricia had been preparing for exactly this. She filed a countersuit detailing Trevor's financial crimes, embezzlement, and fraud. She subpoenaed his financial records and discovered that most of the money he'd stolen was gone, spent on the luxury lifestyle he and Candace had been living. She found evidence of more financial crimes, clients he'd defrauded at his firm. The lawsuit fell apart within weeks. Trevor's own lawyers advised him to drop it before he ended up in jail. But Sienna wasn't done. She pushed forward with the criminal complaint, working with Patricia to provide prosecutors with everything they needed. Justice doesn't always happen, Patricia warned her. Criminal charges are hard to prove. I know, Sienna said, but I have to try. Not for revenge, just for the record. So there's proof of what he did. While the legal battles played out, Sustainable Spaces kept growing. 1 year after launch, they'd processed over 20 million in transactions. Sienna hired 30 employees, opened a real office with a real childcare center so Hope could be nearby. She started a blog about sustainable design that attracted thousands of readers. She became, in industry circles, exactly what she'd been before, a respected voice in interior design. Except now she was more than that. Now she was a survivor who'd built something from nothing. Now she was a single mother running a multimillion-dollar company. Now she was someone who couldn't be destroyed because she'd already survived the worst and come out stronger. The forensic accountant Patricia hired was a quiet man named Robert who spoke in numbers and found truth in spreadsheets. He spent 3 months digging through Trevor's financial history, following digital trails that Trevor thought he'd erased. "It's worse than we thought," Robert told Sienna and Patricia in a conference room at Patricia's office. He displayed charts and graphs showing money movement. "He didn't just steal from you. He's been running a scheme for years, using his position at the financial firm to embezzle from clients. Your money was just one source. He's taken over $2 million total from various accounts." Sienna felt sick. His clients trusted him. Exactly. And he used that trust to steal from elderly people, small business owners, people who couldn't afford to lose their retirement savings. Robert pulled up more documents. His partner, Candace, was helping. She managed the accounts, created the false records. This was sophisticated fraud. Patricia leaned forward. "Can we prove it?" "Absolutely. I've documented everything. The transfers, the fake authorizations, the shell accounts. I've traced the money to luxury purchases, the apartment they're living in, even a boat he bought. He got sloppy because he thought he'd gotten away with it." The evidence went to federal prosecutors who specialized in financial crimes. They were very interested. Trevor Hayes and Candace Williams were stealing from vulnerable people, and the government took that seriously. Agents started an investigation, quietly gathering more evidence, building an airtight case. Meanwhile, Sienna's life kept improving. Sustainable Spaces secured Series B funding, valuing the company at $50 million. She bought a house, nothing ostentatious but comfortable, with a yard where Hope could play. She hired a nanny she could trust, joined a mother's group, started building a real life with real friends who knew her story and supported her. Gerald remained a mentor and investor but kept appropriate distance. He'd done what he set out to do, give someone capable a real chance. Watching Sienna succeed was payment enough. 18 months after Sienna first approached him outside Romano's restaurant, federal agents arrested Trevor at his office. They arrested Candace at the same time. The charges were extensive: wire fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, identity theft. Both faced decades in prison if convicted. The news hit the business section of every major paper. Financial consultant arrested in multimillion-dollar fraud scheme. Sienna read the articles with a strange sense of detachment. This man had destroyed her life, had left her homeless and pregnant, had tried to steal her future. Now he was in handcuffs, his smug face shocked and pale in the booking photos. She didn't feel the satisfaction she'd expected. She just felt tired. Trevor's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but prosecutors weren't interested in being lenient. They had too many victims, too much evidence. The trial was scheduled and it would be public and thorough. Every crime documented, every victim given voice. Patricia called Sienna when Trevor tried to reach out through his lawyer, wanting to talk. "He's asking if you'll testify on his behalf," Patricia said, and Sienna could hear the disgust in her voice. "Claims he was under stress, made bad choices, but he's a good person deep down. Wants you to talk about the good times in your marriage." Sienna laughed, a harsh sound. "Tell him no. Tell him I'll testify, but I'll be telling the truth about what he did. Every detail." She did testify months later when the trial finally happened. She sat in the witness box and told the court about the betrayal, the theft, the systematic destruction of her life. She showed documents, bank statements, messages. She spoke calmly and clearly, no emotion, just facts. Trevor sat at the defense table looking small and defeated. Candace cried throughout the proceedings, but Sienna felt no sympathy. They'd known exactly what they were doing. They'd planned it carefully. They'd destroyed lives for money and comfort. The jury took 6 hours to find them both guilty on all counts. Trevor was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Candace got 12 years. They were ordered to repay everything they'd stolen, though most of the money was gone and they'd be paying restitution for the rest of their lives after prison. When the verdict was read, Sienna sat quietly in the gallery next to Patricia. She'd taken the day off work, arranged for Hope to stay with her nanny, come to see this through to the end. "How do you feel?" Patricia asked as they left the courthouse. "Relieved," Sienna said. "Not happy, just relieved. It's over. He can't hurt anyone else." "You did this," Patricia said. "You survived what he did to you, you built yourself back up, and you made sure he faced consequences. That takes incredible strength." Sienna thought about the woman she'd been, sitting on a sidewalk begging for food. She thought about the woman she was now, running a successful company, raising a healthy daughter, living a good life. The distance between those two versions of herself felt enormous, but it had only been 2 years. "I had help," she said. "Gerald believed in me. You fought for me. I didn't do it alone." "You did the hardest part," Patricia countered. "You didn't give up." That night, Sienna sat in Hope's room watching her daughter sleep. 2 years old now, healthy and happy, completely unaware of the darkness she'd been born into. Hope would never know homelessness, never know hunger, never know what it felt like to have everything ripped away. But someday when Hope was older, Sienna would tell her the story. She'd tell her about falling to the lowest point possible and clawing her way back up. She'd tell her about meeting a billionaire who gave her a chance and building a company from nothing. She'd tell her about justice and consequences and the importance of standing up even when everything seems lost. For now though, she just tucked Hope's blanket more securely around her and whispered, "Mommy loves you. Mommy's got you. Always." The months after Trevor's sentencing should have been triumphant, but Sienna found they were just quiet. She'd spent so long fighting, so long surviving, that she wasn't quite sure what to do with peace when it finally arrived. Her business continued thriving. Hope continued growing, saying new words every day, taking confident steps around their home. Life went on better than before, but marked by everything that had happened. She attended all the restitution hearings, watching as the court seized Trevor's remaining assets. The luxury apartment was sold. The boat he'd bought was auctioned. Candace's jewelry and designer clothes were liquidated. Every penny went back to the victims they'd defrauded, though it wasn't enough to make everyone whole. Sienna received a check for $70,000, a fraction of what had been stolen from her, but something. She didn't cash it right away. She just looked at it, this piece of paper that represented acknowledgement. The court believed her. The system, flawed as it was, had eventually delivered justice. She donated the money to a charity helping homeless pregnant women, the kind of organization that hadn't existed when she'd needed it. Let the money Trevor stole do some good in the world. Trevor's clients contacted her, some of them. Elderly people who'd lost retirement savings, small business owners who'd been ruined. They wanted to know her story, how she'd survived and rebuilt. Sienna met with them when she could, sharing what she'd learned, offering advice about starting over. It didn't fix what had been done to them, but sometimes it helped them feel less alone. Sustainable Spaces continued its exponential growth. 2 years after launch, they had 50,000 users across 40 states. Revenue hit $100 million in processed transactions. Sienna's company was valued at over $200 million. Business magazines wanted to profile her. Tech conferences wanted her as a keynote speaker. She said yes selectively, using the platform to talk about resilience and second chances. She never mentioned Trevor by name in these talks, but she was honest about having been homeless, about losing everything, about rebuilding from absolute zero. Her story resonated with people who'd faced their own disasters. Gerald attended one of her keynote speeches at a major design conference in Chicago. Afterward, they had dinner at a restaurant not unlike Romano's where they'd first met. "You've exceeded every expectation I had," Gerald said, raising his glass. "When I gave you that first chance, I thought you might build a decent small business. I didn't expect this." "I didn't expect it either," Sienna admitted. "I was just trying to survive, to make sure Hope had a roof over her head and food to eat. The success was, I don't know, a side effect of refusing to give up." "That's usually how it works," Gerald said. "The people who succeed aren't always the most talented or the smartest. They're the ones who refuse to quit when things get hard. You've got that in spades." They talked about the future. Gerald suggested Sustainable Spaces could go public within a few years if growth continued. An IPO would make Sienna incredibly wealthy, far beyond the comfortable success she'd already achieved. "I don't know if I want that," Sienna said thoughtfully. "Going public means losing control, answering to shareholders. I like being able to make decisions based on what's right, not just what's profitable." "You've earned the right to choose," Gerald said. "Just know the option exists." The option existed. That phrase stuck with Sienna. She had options now, so many options when 2 years ago she'd had none. The freedom to choose her path, to build her life according to her own values, that was worth more than any amount of money. She thought about Trevor sometimes, sitting in prison, his entire future reduced to a cell and a sentence. She didn't take pleasure in his suffering, but she didn't feel guilty about it either. He'd made choices, taken actions, destroyed lives. The consequences were his own doing. Candace's baby, a boy, was being raised by her parents. Sienna hoped he'd have a better life than his mother had given him the start to. Children shouldn't pay for their parents' crimes. One afternoon, Patricia called with unexpected news. Trevor's lawyer contacted me. He wants to send you a letter apologizing. It has to go through me first per the restraining order, but technically he's allowed to send it if you're willing to receive it. Is he looking for sympathy? Trying to reduce his sentence? Sienna asked. Probably both, Patricia admitted. You don't have to read it. I can send back a refusal. Sienna thought about it. Part of her was curious what Trevor would say, what justifications he'd offer. But mostly she just felt indifferent. His apology wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't give her back the months she'd spent homeless. It wouldn't erase the trauma or the fear or the struggle. Tell him I don't need his apology, she said finally. Tell him the best thing he can do for me is serve his sentence quietly and never contact me again. I've moved on and I'd like to keep it that way. Will do, Patricia said, and Sienna heard the approval in her voice. Moving on. That's what she was doing, one day at a time. Building a life not defined by what had been done to her, but by what she'd built in response. Trevor had tried to destroy her, but instead he'd forged her into something stronger. She'd survived homelessness and betrayal and come out on the other side capable of building an empire. The irony wasn't lost on her. If Trevor hadn't betrayed her, she'd probably still be running her small interior design firm, comfortable but not exceptional. His cruelty had pushed her to discover capabilities she'd never known she possessed. Not that she was grateful, exactly, but she recognized the strange transformation that had occurred. She was not the woman she'd been in her first marriage. That woman had been naive, trusting, unprepared for the world's cruelty. The woman she was now. She could handle anything. She'd already handled the worst and survived. 3 years after sitting on that sidewalk outside Romano's, Sienna stood in her corner office on the 20th floor of the building sustainable spaces now occupied. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, afternoon sunlight streaming in bright and clear. Her company employed 200 people across 3 offices. Her personal net worth had crossed $50 million. She'd been featured on the cover of Fast Company with the headline "From Homeless to CEO, the Sienna Brooks Story." But the numbers and accolades weren't what made her happy. What made her happy was looking at the photo on her desk of Hope blowing out candles on her 3rd birthday cake, chocolate frosting smeared across her face, pure joy in her eyes. That little girl would never know poverty, never know homelessness, never know what it felt like to be abandoned by someone who claimed to love you. Hope attended a good preschool now, had friends, had a nanny who adored her and a mother who worked hard but was always present for important moments. She had a bedroom full of toys, a closet full of clothes, a future full of possibilities. Everything Sienna had fought for, rebuilt for, survived for. There was a knock on her office door. Tasha, her lead developer from the early days who was now CTO, poked her head in. Got a minute? I have someone who wants to meet you. Sienna waved her in, and Tasha entered followed by a younger woman, maybe 25, who looked nervous and determined in equal measure. This is Jennifer, Tasha said. She's been living in her car for the past 2 months, but she has a computer science degree and an incredible portfolio. She applied for our junior developer position and honestly, she's overqualified. But she needs a break. Reminded me of someone. Sienna looked at Jennifer, seeing herself 3 years ago in those desperate, hopeful eyes. Sit down, she said gently. Tell me your story. Jennifer told her about losing her job when her company downsized, burning through savings, getting evicted, trying to keep up appearances while living in her Honda Civic. It was painfully familiar. The shame, the struggle, the desperate attempt to maintain dignity while the world treated you as invisible. When Jennifer finished, Sienna made a decision. Tasha, hire her. Full junior developer salary plus benefits. Jennifer, we also have a company assistance program that helps employees with housing deposits and first month's rent, interest-free. You'll pay it back over time, but you'll have a safe place to live starting next week. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. Are you serious? Completely serious, Sienna said. Tasha, get HR to expedite the housing assistance. Jennifer, welcome to Sustainable Spaces. I expect you to work hard, but I also expect you to ask for help when you need it. We take care of our people here. After they left, Sienna sat quietly in her office, thinking about cycles and chances. Gerald had given her a chance when she had nothing. Now she was in a position to do the same for others. The company assistance program she'd established helped 3 employees so far, people struggling with emergencies or bad situations, giving them stability so they could do their best work. It felt good, using her success to create real change in individual lives. It felt like the suffering she'd endured had purpose, had transformed into something meaningful. Her phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Final restitution hearing complete. Trevor's assets fully liquidated. All victims paid what could be recovered. Case officially closed. That chapter of her life was officially over. Trevor would be in prison for another 12 years. By the time he got out, Hope would be in high school. Sienna's company would be even more established. He'd be a middle-aged man with a criminal record, starting over from nothing while she was living a life of success and stability. She didn't take pleasure in his punishment, but she did feel a sense of closure. Justice had been served. The truth had come out. The system, slow and imperfect as it was, had eventually worked. That evening, Sienna picked up Hope from preschool and took her to the park. They fed ducks at the pond, Hope shrieking with delight when the ducks quacked and crowded around. Other mothers sat on benches nearby, and one of them, a woman named Rachel who Sienna had become friends with, came to sit beside her. "Hope's getting so big," Rachel said. "Hard to believe she was that tiny baby you brought to Mother's group." "Time goes fast," Sienna agreed, watching her daughter chase after ducks with pure, uncomplicated joy. "Can I ask you something?" Rachel said carefully. "Your story, what you went through, do you ever worry it'll happen again? That someone will come along and destroy what you've built?" Sienna had thought about this question a lot over the past 3 years. "I used to," she admitted. "I was terrified every day that it would all get taken away again. But I've learned something important. What happened to me before happened because I was trusting and unprepared. Now I'm neither. I have legal protections, financial safeguards, and most importantly, I know what I'm capable of surviving." "You're not afraid anymore?" "I'm always a little afraid," Sienna said honestly. "But fear doesn't control me anymore. I've seen the worst-case scenario, lived through it, and came out stronger. That's a kind of power Trevor never expected me to have. He thought destroying me would break me permanently. Instead, it taught me I'm unbreakable." Rachel nodded slowly. "You're inspiring, you know that? The way you talk about what happened, how you rebuilt, it makes the rest of us feel like maybe we could survive hard things too." "You could," Sienna said simply. "Humans are more resilient than we think. We just don't usually find out until we're tested." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play. This was what happiness looked like, Sienna realized. Not the magazine covers or the money or the success, though those were nice. Real happiness was sitting on a park bench on a sunny afternoon, watching your healthy child play, having friends who cared about you, knowing you'd built something solid and real that nobody could take away. That night, after putting Hope to bed, Sienna sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and her laptop. She'd been thinking about expanding the company's charity work, maybe starting a formal nonprofit focused on helping homeless pregnant women. She had the resources now to make a real difference, to create the safety net that hadn't existed when she'd needed it. She drafted an email to Patricia and Gerald, outlining her ideas. A foundation that provided housing, medical care, job training, and childcare for pregnant women in crisis. Not just temporary help, but comprehensive support to help them rebuild their lives. She'd call it Hope's Foundation, named after her daughter who'd been born into such difficult circumstances but who represented everything good that had come from that darkness. As she hit send, she felt peaceful. This was who she was now, a survivor who helped other survivors. A woman who'd been destroyed and rebuilt herself stronger. A mother raising her daughter to be resilient and compassionate. A business owner using her success to create positive change. Trevor had tried to erase her from the world, but instead he'd revealed what she was truly capable of becoming. She'd never thank him for it, but she could acknowledge the transformation. The woman who'd begged for food outside Romano's was gone, replaced by someone fiercer, smarter, and infinitely more capable. Sienna walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there were other women going through what she'd survived, thinking they'd never recover, that their lives were over. She wanted them to know they were wrong. You could lose everything and still rebuild. You could be betrayed and still trust again, carefully, wisely. You could end up homeless and pregnant and still become successful beyond your dreams. The journey wasn't easy, but it was possible. She was living proof. Her phone buzzed with responses from Patricia and Gerald, both enthusiastically supporting the foundation idea. They'd meet next week to start planning. Another project, another way to turn her painful past into something meaningful. Sienna smiled, finishing her tea and heading to bed. Tomorrow she had a board meeting, interviews with potential investors, and Hope's parent-teacher conference at preschool. A full day in her full life, this beautiful life she built from absolutely nothing. She fell asleep quickly, peacefully, secure in her home and her future. No nightmares about sidewalks or hunger or cold. Just dreams about tomorrow and all the possibilities it held. 3 years ago, a billionaire had looked at a desperate homeless woman and seen potential worth investing in. He'd given her a chance when she had nothing. Now she was paying that chance forward, multiplying it, turning one act of kindness into an empire of opportunity. This was her happy ending, not a fairy tale rescue or a romantic reunion, but something better. Real independence, genuine success, and the satisfaction of knowing she'd earned every bit of it through her own strength and determination. She'd been knocked down as far as anyone could fall and she'd gotten back up. That was the story she'd tell Hope someday. Not about the husband who betrayed them or the time they spent on the streets, but about resilience and rebirth. About losing everything and discovering you carry your strength within you always, even when you can't feel it. The city sparkled outside her window, full of people pursuing their dreams, building their lives, surviving their own storms. Sienna was one of them now, no longer struggling but thriving, her past behind her and her future bright with possibility. She'd asked a billionaire for leftover food and he'd given her something far more valuable, a chance to prove what she was capable of. She'd taken that chance and built an empire. That was the real story, the one that mattered. And it was just the beginning.